Thanks a lot, Aino, and good morning, everyone. We are here to take you on a journey from waterfall to agile. And when we started out on the journey, we were very much an agile organization, and you will get to see that. But we actually managed to
waterfall, right?
Yeah, waterfall. Yeah, sorry. And we actually managed to get a bit of agile. So let's start.
So, yeah, as Aino said, I'm Tomas Eilsø, and I used to fly F-16s. Actually, it's not as weird to go into the agile world from an F-16 pilot. You know, just Jeff Sutherland, he was also flying F-16s. And I did a talk yesterday where I talked a lot about some of the similarities in air combat. You know, we have some of the same problems that we have in the agile world. It's really, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you need to handle planning, execution, and organization with a lot of people sometimes with that uncertainty. So some of the strategies I used as a fighter pilot is actually the same strategies I find in the agile space. And there also is a couple that we learned that, you know, is actually inspires me once in a while. So I talked about it yesterday in the talk, Safe versus Scrum. How many of you saw that talk? Wow, so actually quite a bit. So some of you might actually have been lagging a little bit of context for what Safe is. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about that, some of the processes behind it, but of course also how we were struggling in these teams. So you will get a little bit of information about it. When I'm not coaching Agile, I've been doing that for the last 11 years, working with Lean and Agile in different contexts. I'm also developing a little bit. I started developing when I was 12. I really love coding, coded on Lambda, it was called, and later machine code assembler on Commodore 64. Right now I don't have too much time coding, but I code a little bit on the Air Force F-16 simulators. So I own the company that are building the next generation flight simulators for the Air Force, which I'm really proud of, actually. We won that contract based on agility, so I think that's really a tribute to Agile, that we could compete against some really major US companies there.
Yeah, and my name is Christian. The Danish names are a bit difficult for foreigners to pronounce, so you can also call me Yde if you have an easier time with that. I'm a political scientist major, and as Aino just said, I turned to IT because, hey, it's not because it's boring, because it's actually quite fun. There's so many problems in IT and IT development that is interesting for a guy like me to solve. So I've been with TDC for 7 years, and I've been working also in the business departments in TDC, and posed a few ideas there that we could try out, and then suddenly, whoop, I fell into the IT department. But a little bit more about the stuff that we do, because TDC is a pretty old company, right? It's 136 years old. We started with 22 subscribers, and that's actually the 22 subscribers. And our product was fairly simple. It was a phone, and our IT department were, I don't know, maybe it's a bit complex, but that's how it looked like, the operations in IT. So things have progressed a little bit more since then. So when I got into this business, things needed to be done a little bit differently. Like, we are not moving codes around. So we are building in our department, or in my department, recommendations and guidance solutions. We are trying to figure out what's the optimal way for a problem to be solved. And we are delivering systems to our contact center. So whenever any of you guys call TDC, you're going to be using indirectly the systems that we built. So we built some pretty hardcore IT stuff here, but and also for our technicians as well. So we have the whole value chain in this department. But it's not interesting what we built. It's more interesting for you guys to hear how we get stuff done, right? So the first thing you need to know is that my team is a distributed team. So we are situated in Aarhus, in Denmark. We have developers in Pune, in India, and in Bangalore, also India. So there's quite a geographic distance between developers and people who know stuff about the business. Another thing that I did was I also took a look at how do we do projects in TDC? How do we decide on scope? So I looked through 50 or so projects that I've been part of, or that I had been in a steering committee of, and took a look at how do we actually decide on what we are building in TDC. And basically what we came up with was the project has its scope decided by a committee, right? A committee could be a group of business analysts or whatever, but they are removed from the users in some way. Or it could be a steering committee that suddenly just made hey, we need to do this in that project, right? It could also be the opinion of subject matter experts that had expert knowledge of a system saying, okay, we can't do this, we can do this in that way. But the really scary thing here is, to me at least, is that 10% of the scope is only 10% of the scope is driven by users. And let's keep that in mind, because we are taking all of those requirements from the scope in my department. And so what we do is we get the handover from our business partners, and then we write this good long list of requirements, and we wrap them up pretty nicely. We are focused on making sure that it's, of course, achievable, and we can measure it, and we can see that stuff is made, right? So we wrap that up, and then we send that in a nice package to our developers. And we have a little bit of assessment, talking back and forth. They ask questions, we answer them and stuff like that. And then eventually we'll get to a sort of common understanding, and we'll say, okay, we got it, we'll see you soon. And from then on, it's more like tracking the progress, right? So we would do status report, asking them how much time is left until you're done, how far are you, how much effort have you spent so far, and we would report that back up to our department, or our business department. So we would doing a lot of stakeholder management, and we'd be focused on making sure that cost isn't getting out of control. And meanwhile, after they understand what they're supposed to be doing, they will get their gears grinding and start working on this stuff. And they will be focused on time, right? They want to be focused on not failing, because their livelihood is dependent on them delivering these requirements. So they will take the long list of requirements, they will check mark that they built the stuff that they were supposed to be building. And once they think they're done, they will pack it up, send it to us, and we'll, if we are happy with it, we'll deploy it. But the central point here is that we're missing something. We're missing some interaction. We're missing, the developers are missing that interaction where it says, what do they think about what I just did? And what change did I do? Because developers are removed from the business. Okay? Another thing is also that we tend to pile or batch up projects. Right? It takes a long time and a lot of effort to get a project prioritized. Or even if we find that we have a task we need to do, we need to get to write that task and get it prioritized in a minor task project and stuff like that. So what happens is that we spend a lot of time doing the design phase, and we build, and then we release something. And when we release that, we are immediately starting on the next batch, right? So we don't get that feedback, that interaction between users and developers. And even if we find something up here in the first batch of work that we want to fix, we can't fix it until the third release because we're already busy doing something else. So this sort of feeds into this process that enforces itself, where you have business guys looking at IT and saying, oh wow, that's what's going on down there. It's alien, we don't understand it. Or we're not getting what we want. So you can see two of those guys up there are pretty angry. They thought they had this project that they wanted, and they got it out, and no, it wasn't exactly what they needed. And another guy is a little bit skeptical, and the last two guys are like, that's pretty curious, wonder what's going on down there in IT. And the IT guy, he's looking at the users and saying, Okay, the business units don't think that they get what they want, but that's just because users don't understand what I built, right? They don't know how to use it. They're cave people. They're doing something else, right? And if we remember the way that we decided on scope in the first place, only 10% of that scope was actually user-driven. So no wonder that the IT dude is thinking this. So at least this is my experience. So when I got into this job, my business partner asked or told me that now that I got this job, you need to produce more in a higher quality. So I was like, huh? Say what? How can I do that? That's a trade-off, right? But it turns out that no, it's not really a trade-off. You can actually do this, but given the constraints, I was massively challenged. So we needed to do something. We needed to change the reality that we were in. So we needed to, first of all, understand that IT and business is in the same boat, right? We needed to get that perception out. And the two guys in the front of the boat, they are in the same boat, but they don't want to help fix it, or no one told them that they should fix it, or maybe they forgot to bring the tools to help them fix it, right? So we needed to get that understanding out that everyone is in the same boat. And we've been experimenting a bit with Agile in CDC, and most of you would probably recognize the Scrum waterfall talk, right? You think you're Agile and you do some Scrum teams and then you do project funding. Another thing is that when we started Agile, I didn't know anything about it. I was like, Agile, isn't that just a way of just deciding on scope and change scope and don't have a plan and don't follow anything? So these misperceptions was something that we had to combat. So I set up 3 goals that I needed to change really rapidly. One, I needed to move knowledge away from specialists and spread it out on the team. And I also wanted to distribute the workload. I needed to stop people from having this bottleneck over here or one person that could only do one thing, right? And another thing I needed to understand was that if I wanted to deliver more quality, I also needed to have more people, more brain power active. I couldn't have people just sit idly, wait until something came their way. And I needed to collaborate better with business. And lastly, we had a problem with red tape, right? So we had some innovation, but it got killed because you needed to fund that idea. You needed to fund that task that that person needed to do. So there was a lot of red tape in order to get that. So people either censored something out and said, this is never going to get approved, or they spend a lot of time trying to get that task prioritized. So Thomas, what can I do?
Well, as you heard, Christian thought Agile was just this loose thing with where you could just basically do what you wanted. So I needed to convince him that that was not the case, right? So I found this picture on the net, which is basically safe, and that convinced him pretty quickly.
Simple, right?
So yeah, it was actually a pretty good match also for us because these guys, well, a few of them had a little bit of experience. Some of the Indian guys had a Scrum Master course and a little bit of practical experience, but most didn't have any experience at all with Agile. And what SAFE does is provide a common understanding of all the, and the vocabulary of all these basic stuff like what is a user story, what is a sprint, and it's easy to teach from. And I was working with Christian and the teams only part-time, so I needed all the help I could get to get us a kickstart on this. So that is one of the reasons we chose SAFE. I'm going to run through it pretty quickly here, what the ideas are behind SAFE. This is a drawing that you would understand better after a 2-day workshop, but I'm going to give you the core ideas here and sort of the flow of the process. So the bottom layer is just normal Scrum stuff and Kanban stuff, all the practices you know from Agile. Then there is this layer on top of it, which is just a container, basically, for the teams. Could look like this. You have the Scrum teams there, and then at the bottom there are some servant leaders. They are focusing on what we should do, just like a product owner. but there's one looking out for all the teams. And then you have an architect, which, to some of you agile gurus might sound a little bit weird. We don't want architects to do our stuff right. We want the best architecture to emerge from the teams. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, because it's actually not that anti-agile, in my opinion at least. Then we have what is called an RTE, a release train engineer, which is basically just a scrum master for the teams. And in this case, it was Christian. So in this setup, we have 4 teams when we start. In SAFe, you can have up to 12 coordinating in this way. The important thing about this group is that it needs to be cross-functional. So they need to plan and execute together as a cross-functional group. And as you heard from Christian's intro, they were really, really siloed when we started. Christian had his IT dudes who were responsible for building stuff, and they were handing stuff over between business and IT, basically. So we needed to change that. We needed to have the whole value chain involved, all the guys that are responsible for building this product need to work together in the same boat. And that's also a core idea in SAFe. Then the top layer here is really dealing with how to manage funding. And traditionally, Christian needed to get a project approved every time he would do anything or had to do anything. And then he would get people allocated to stuff. So basically the classical project funding method. And it just creates so much hassle and start and stop, and it really doesn't work. A lot of delays. So what we agreed on actually pretty quickly, it amazed me how easy a sell this was actually, was to fund the teams instead, without knowing exactly what they were going to build. So it took about 2 weeks. We had some managers at the higher level in TDC go to a SAFe course, and they understood that, hey, this is actually an important part of SAFe. So they were funding Christian's teams for the next year without knowing exactly what they would get out of it. I would have imagined that would be really hard, but it just happened. So how do we work, and how does SAFe actually think about planning? There is this idea in SAFe called an increment, which is basically 5 sprints in a row, and you do sort of a high-level planning based on that. It could look like a big batch of stuff, but we need to remember that this is only a planning session, a synchronization session, a session where we align roughly about what we're going to work on for the next period. So it has nothing to do with releases. We can release several times a day if that's what we want, and get feedback on what we're actually working on. What we also need to think about is what is planning and what is a plan. So we have a little bit of a love-hate relationship to planning in Agile, right? And it's the same thing actually in the military, as I mentioned. This guy, Eisenhower, says that plans are worthless. He's really, really hard on plans, right? And he has this other idea that planning is everything. So what does he mean by that? How can the output of planning, a plan, be worthless, and then planning still be worth something? His idea is that it's really not the plan which is the output of the planning. The output of the planning is alignment, a shared mental model about what can be achieved, where are the risks, and what do we need to look out for when we are executing. So it's really a tool, this 3 months planning session that I'm going to talk about in a bit, called PI planning. It's really a tool to get a common understanding of and decentralize execution and make communication easier while we execute. So if you're thinking about planning like this, sort of a decision tree, where you need to find the single best plan when you start out, that's not what we are looking for in SAFe. What we're looking for is a rough guidance on a mission. What is it we're trying to achieve? What is it, the outcome, the difference we want to make to the customers? And we want to have a shared understanding of it, give us a general direction. And we want to minimize the constraints so that the teams can actually, as they execute, choose their own way through this to maximize the impact of the customers. So if we look at the individual sprints that we execute in this increment, they look pretty much like a normal Scrum meetings. This would be a calendar. You have your planning, your refinement meetings. So there's a couple of red dots there. They're called Art Sync. It's basically Scrum of Scrums. You have the same thing for product management. And then in the end, the teams demo, but they do that individually. And then they also have a common system demo where everybody shows to each other what they have done. We were only 4 teams. SAFe actually says you need to be 5 to 12. We thought we might want to check it out anyway with the only 4. But we modified it a bit actually here because we were so few people that instead of first doing team demos and then doing a common system demo, we actually just put that all together. We were few people enough that that made sense for us, and that has worked out okay. The other thing is the team retrospects. SAFe says that you should do that on team level, but we wanted to test also what would happen if we did them first on team level and then put them together to sort of share their learnings. And that has turned out to be really amazing, actually. I don't know if some of you have issues or are in teams where they feel sometimes that retrospects you're not getting all the benefit out of it. What we saw was that as soon as people start sharing and actually showing a little bit, being a little bit vulnerable about what they are challenged with in their teams, and you see that from another team that, hey, these guys are actually sharing it and they're doing something about it. It sort of creates this, raises the bar a little bit. We all want to, get something out of our retrospects. So that has been pretty nice. And of course, you also get to help each other and share solutions to different problems. Turns out a lot of the problems are actually the same, right? Then there is this IP sprint, which really is a dual-purpose thing. It's a buffer, first of all, so when you do your 3 months planning, you don't take that capacity into account. And then you also have some events in there. You could do hackathons, you could do some planning preparation, of course not for everybody, but some people might be a little bit more involved with that. Then you could put if you have any education activities, this is a nice place to do it. You have an inspect and adapt workshop, which is basically a full all people in a room meeting where you're doing a common retrospect. That has been a pretty cool thing also. We'll talk a bit about that later. Then there's a PI planning 2-day workshop where a lot of stuff is going on. And this is really important from the perspective of alignment, and that is the purpose of it. So you start out with understanding the big picture. We have different peoples going on the scene there. We have our product management talking about what sort of big things do they think we need to work on, what are the challenges they see across teams that we should help with. And then the idea is that later on, as the teams actually execute on these features that he will present, they are allowed to do lean startup and lean UX practices, right? So this is not a constraint that you must do this, you must deliver this. It's just, I've spent some work on, trying to gather the big picture, and this is what I see. Go fetch, go solve the problems. So it's stuff like this. He asked a lot of the users, what are you actually thinking about our product? Is it actually solving the stuff that we hope to do? We also have, we didn't have it in the beginning actually, but this girl, Katrina, is a UX specialist or whatever you could call her. She after a month or so, we figured out that, hey, we're going in a little bit different directions, UX-wise. So we need to, have some alignment on it. And she stood forward, and she's now presenting on these meetings also to give us some rough alignment on where to go, give us some guidance. But she's really just a team member who have this additional task of trying to align us on it. This is Sina. She's our architect. So I asked her a couple of weeks ago when we did the last PI planning, and let's see what she says. One question regarding your role as an architect. In the Agile Manifesto, there's this wording that the best architecture comes from self-organizing teams. So it seems that your role is not Agile because you're deciding everything regarding architecture.
Well, I'm not deciding everything. I'm just making sure that the teams are aligned on it.
Oh,
I'm not disagreeing that self-organizing is good, but it's only good if you're not, going in different directions all the time.
okay. So how do you help them align on that?
I look at what tasks are they doing or what features are they doing, and are different teams doing features that are alike, and that we should make sure use the same services, and stuff like that.
Okay. We're in the middle of a PI right now, and on day 2. And yesterday I noticed you on the stage there giving a presentation about some of the things coming in the future. When you prepared for that thing, what went through your mind? What did you think about, and what did you want to achieve with it?
Well, I wanted to give a short introduction to these new microservices that are coming, and I just thought that this was important for everyone to know. So I didn't really have a lot of time to prepare for it, but that was pretty much what I was thinking.
Okay.
What is important for people to know, and
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure.
So this is a sentence from SAFE: the teams deserve to see the bigger picture and be empowered to design their part. You might ask, why can't the teams just figure this out themselves? But that's actually what they're doing. Sina is part of a team. She just, takes on this extra responsibility of, getting the big picture for everyone. But everybody is allowed to coordinate. She's not having a lot of authority, actually. Then after we have heard a lot about the big picture stuff, we have team breakouts. We have a common vision now. We know what we're trying to achieve, and we know where we have suffered a little bit in the past. And now it's the team's turn to figure out what can we actually do here. And so it's sort of like a backlog refinement session that you do in the team breakout. After that, we have a team review, so we just quickly go through the big picture of each individual teams. What do they think will be achievable, and what are they struggling a little bit with? And then everybody gets a common understanding of it. Probably also realize that there's going to be some problems, and we need to change the plan a little bit, so we'll talk about that. Then the next day, we'll have had time to think a bit about it, get some sleep, and then we'll present to everybody a change in direction if it's needed, and then we'll have another team breakout. So this is one of our Indian developers, and I asked her a few questions also, so let's hear what she thinks about this PI planning thing. Right now we're in the middle of, or actually in the end of PI planning, so this 2-day planning session. It sounds pretty boring. I mean, I can imagine that you'd rather be coding and doing valuable stuff. But how, is it valuable also to do this PI planning thing? And
well, I don't find it like boring. Whatever the valuable coding that we do, it has to get us kickstart. So I guess this PI planning is where we get to start everything, and we cannot do coding. We do not know what to develop if we do not have this planning. This is the most efficient part, the start of all the coding that follows on. So I believe it's not that boring. You get to discuss what all tasks or what all things you are about to develop in the further process. So you just know that why you are going to do that work. You know what business value that will come out at the end of the coding that you do. So it's more of like you're going to do something that users or the customers will be happy at the end of the day. So this PI planning is a very essential part of all the coding that is going to get followed up.
Okay. So what I'm hearing her saying is that this actually puts some purpose into her life. You mentioned in the beginning there, Christian, that that was one thing we were struggling with, and we actually also saw that on some of the metrics on happiness that the TDC is collecting, and those have gone up rapidly after we started doing this stuff, so that's pretty cool, I think. Then we do a quick review of the plans after another team breakout, so you have this iteration again on collecting the big picture, then going out, doing detailed stuff, collecting the big picture again. And then you have some sessions in the end where you sort of look at the risk. We want to understand also what is going to be hard to achieve. And remember, back then where they were doing pure waterfall, the IT department were mostly looking for the technical risks, and the business were looking at the business risk. But here we do it in a collected forum. We all want to understand the risks on both sides, and I think that's really cool also. Then you do a confidence vote, like a fist of 5. How sure are we that we can achieve these goals? It has actually worked pretty well for us also. And finally, you do maybe some planning if people are not happy with this, and the retro. So that's the basic process of SAFE. Then we had these guys who hadn't been doing any agile at all, and we wanted to teach them this stuff. So we thought a bit about how to start that, and we decided on doing a 2-day workshop where we taught people mostly about actually the individuals and interaction stuff, and also some basic Scrum, but really focusing on cross-functionality, really understanding why is it that it's not working what we're doing, all these handoffs and delays, why is it that won't work, and we need you guys to work together now as a cross-functional team. We need you to rip over your cards where it says that you have this specialist role, and now we're just all product developers. And that was the main goal of that training. So we did a lot of exercises to enforce that. And then in the end, we wanted the teams to self-organize. So we created a list together of how a perfect team would look for us. So we came up with stuff like we need someone who understands the front-end technology, someone who understands some other technologies that were involved. Also, would be nice with having someone with Scrum experience and someone who understands the business. So this list of, I think, 12, 15 criteria, that would be nice. And then we ask people to, step into the middle of the room and then, go self-organize. Go into teams that match these criteria. So what do you think happened? Well, you would think they would do this, right? But that's not what they did. They basically went to the people they liked working with and tried to form teams with them. So we had, I think, 4 teams actually also in the beginning, but they were not really matching the criteria, right? But then after a while, people are talking to each other and, hey, we don't have anybody who understands the business here, but there's 2 over there. We know you guys really like each other, but maybe we should. And then, it went on for 20 minutes or so, and then we're actually pretty happy with the teams. And the cool thing about this is that if you are selected like that, and they also select the product owners and Scrum Masters themselves, you sort of, if you're Scrum Master and you're selected by your own team, you get that real feeling of being a servant leader. You're really there for them to help them, and they have selected you, and you know that if you're not doing a good job, then we might change to another person as a Scrum Master. So, this all's pretty easy, I would think. But let's hear, Christian, what happens when theory meets practice.
Yeah, so we were all trained now to be agile. I mean, you saw all the calendar meetings that we needed to do. So we took that meeting and put it into an Outlook calendar, took another meeting, put that into another day in the same Outlook calendar. We took a bunch of people's Outlook calendars and we merged these meetings into it. And we had this sack of money, it's our budget. So we were also funded for a year, as Thomas has said. So, well, we are agile, aren't we? Right. We have all the meetings, we're doing all the processes, right? And we have the budget. So, hey, we're agile. Yee, let's go. No. Because it's not really about the processes, it's more about the people. But let's take that story. So in the beginning, our physical environments were pretty horrible, right? We started out being distributed on 3 locations. Remember that. We were in Pune, in Bangalore, and we were on Aarhus, right? So we've been used to mailing to each other when we wanted to communicate. So we had these long email threads where we got pushed back and forward, and people got added to it and removed from it and then re-added. So that's the way we used to communicate. Also, we are a communication company, right? So you should expect us to be able to understand how to communicate. Well, we had one landline for 4 teams on 3 locations. Trying to communicate.
In each team, they had people from each location also.
Yeah.
This is really crappy, actually.
Yeah. So each team were also geographically placed on 3 different locations, thousands of kilometers apart. And we had one landline. Hey, a landline, that's enough. It can pick up conversations going on 10 different places, right? No, not really. So all of these things were a problem to us.
Just one comment, Christian.
Yeah. Sure.
We have this idea from the manifesto, right, that people and interactions over processes and tools. But if you have a distributed teams like this, if you don't have tooling in place to have some sort of virtual co-location, whatever, you're totally screwed. You can't do it. So that's one of the lessons I think we learned, that you really need to invest in this if you would have any chance to start to form any kind of team that know each other and works well together.
Yeah, exactly. So 3 weeks in, we had a plan, right? We were agile. We had an agile plan. Does this look familiar to you? This is a Gantt chart, right? If you recognize these things. I don't know if all of you come from a waterfall world. But what's interesting is that there's a deadline date up there. You can see that release marker, that's milestone. Yeah? So we were asked to deliver in 3 months. We were supposed to deliver a lot of scope. I'll tell you more about the scope in a bit. But the problem here that you can see right away is that people's mindset was still stuck in that waterfall world, right? They were still trying to mesh everything into requirements, and we mesh everything into a set of features that needed to be developed and a release date, which is the milestone, project closure. Yay, right? They saw next thing, right? So the mindset here was not really changed. People were agile in outlook and agile in budget, but they were still thinking in project terms and waterfall terms. So at this point in time, the best thing that could describe us was a Scrum waterfall organization. So a month and a half into this process, we realized this is going bad. We were not going to meet that deadline. That's for sure. I mean, we took in way too much scope. And the good thing about this framework here, and the good thing about what we've been doing for this 1.5 months, was that we actually realized that pretty quickly. More quickly than we probably would have in a project. And the reason we did that is because we had the system demos, right? So on the system demos, we realized that what we were actually building were mock-ups and design documents. We didn't produce anything of value, actually. So a couple of sprints in, we stopped up and we figured out we needed to do something differently right now. So we changed the focus, looking at, okay, so we had a long list of requirements that we needed to deliver, so that was our focus. And we knew that's not going to happen, so we needed to do something different. So we took a look at what is the value that we can generate from now on and until March 27. So immediately people switched from being, okay, wait, we need to deliver all of these requirements and report on this progress, to being focused on outcome, on value, on outcome hypothesis. And also, what can we actually deliver? So we started to prioritize through all of these features that we wanted to build and figure out what was the value that we could generate for the users. So we did some quick workshops with users, showed them a little bit what we're doing, went back, coded, did a couple of sprints, showed it again and got some quick feedback, and we did that for the next part. So 3 months in, we released on the 27th of March. And we released something that users really, really, really liked. And we released, and the reason why they liked it is because they were amazed that they've been spending 1.5 years discussing and debating and trying to build a scope on a project. And it became so big that it was just canceled. It didn't fly. So we took, and that was the scope that we were also trying to deliver in the 27th of March deadline. So we took what we could see generated the most value and we delivered that. So they actually chose an organization outside of their own immediately silo as the best team award because of this change, because they saw, hey, we are involved, they are taking care of what we need, and they're building something that we use. Right?
So that was sort of a turning point.
This was a major game changer for us, because we figured out that we're not supposed to be focusing on the requirements. So for our business partners that are part of our team now we're using a we paradigm. They also saw this. They also saw, oh, wait, it doesn't pay off to come with demands and requirements like that. We need to set the direction. We need to inspire people to understand the value of what they're building. And they saw this also because of this. So now we see that 4 months in, that this agile culture is starting to emerge. And one of the things that can use as a benchmark for that is people are actually starting to move out of their comfort zone. They dare to move out of their comfort zone. They can see the value of moving out of their comfort zone. Previously, people were very happy with being very specialized because that was safe. You could deliver within your specialized zone, but that also created bottlenecks. You only need this much of an API guy and this amount of front-end workers, right? And you couldn't always plan on when to meet or distribute the work so that you can work efficiently. So this is where cross-skilling comes in. Right? So people realize that, hey, we're sort of moving ourselves into deadlines, into bottlenecks now and then. How can we help that? And then they started to move out of their comfort, saying, hey, I could actually do a little bit of this programming on that, learn a new coding language. Another thing was that people were willing to be far more vulnerable. I mean, on our common retrospects, it was no longer accepted that you didn't fail in a sprint, that you didn't talk about shortcomings in that sprint. And the other teams, they started to help those other teams, or maybe they shared something and then we worked on it together in that common retrospect. So we found our common solution, or we helped each other in each of the teams. So we try to experiment a little bit here as well. But the teams also made an effort now on each sprint in the system demo to show some real progress. They no longer accepted just being able to show some wireframe or prototype and call that value. No, they wanted to build something incrementally that made value to the users and demo that on the system demo. And as your point was, Thomas, tooling here is really everything. So when you have a team that is, at best can be described as virtually co-located, and you expect them to be able to work together, you need proper tools for it. So we invested quite heavily in buying new licenses for other tools so that we could collaborate better, and we could make virtual sticky notes and stuff like that, so it felt a little bit more like a physical environment that you were talking about. Thomas?
Yeah, one thing I think helped them progress here was actually, doing the system demos together. And when, in the beginning, some of the teams were really stuck in this waterfall mindset, but they saw other teams actually finishing stuff, and they could, ask questions about how did you actually achieve it. That sort of, the common group and seeing what all teams are doing, that sort of helps lift the bar a little bit, I think. So
yes, definitely.
Yeah, definitely those system demos and common retrospect help us increase that, I think.
So this one bit here is actually very, very important. It is super important that you focus on what is the outcome that you want to do, and not focus on what requirement are you spending. It's what value are you generating, what value are you building. So 6 months in, we switched from we probably switched from requirement specifications to proper outcome hypothesis, where businesses or business comes with a strategy and we have one direction, and we work weekly on that. We constantly realign ourselves on that direction. So features are no longer defined by requirements or demands and what we want and where we want it. It's defined by what outcome are we expecting from this.
So what positive change for the customer do we want?
Yes.
We want to increase, the use of something and or some guide. So, the teams themselves have to figure out how do we do it. It's not just a list of, specific things they need to change. It's a problem they need to solve for the customer. That's what we mean by outcome.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And we see that initiatives are actually springing now out from teams. They are suggesting things that can be done. Features are mostly user-oriented now. It's mostly developers that see that, oh, hey, I can see users are moving this way through our system. Maybe we should change this. They are doing other things, for instance, by themselves, looking into how can we generate data that can show us more about how users are progressing and how can we meet the users. So they go out and see how users are working. They do field studies now. So they do a lot of things, but most importantly, they're doing the short feedback loop. So they get constant feedback from users. And this is not just for the Danish guys. These are also Indian guys that come up here and they go out and they see how the program is being used, and they do it through our Danish colleagues, of course, if they are hindered from doing so. So they have a lot of short feedback loops, and they actually know what change they are making. As you saw from Soumya, the video you just saw, she actually is very concerned about what value she generates. It's a big motivation driver for her and for when she is building stuff. So the main part here is what's most important is outcome, but also people are actually having fun, right? So in every retrospect, we are trying to evaluate ourselves if we're having fun working in this framework. And if we remove the first 2 months, then after a couple of months, people are not just happy, they are super excited. They respond with that they're role models in having fun, right? So, and that's a big driver for motivation as well, and especially for the quality that you generate when you write, when you work. So what can you take away from our talk here?
I think one thing I learned is that the SAFe framework is actually okay also on what I would call a smaller scale. This is not hundreds of teams, right? You could definitely do without a framework, just having these 4 teams work together. But it's okay actually with some guidance, especially if you're starting from scratch like we did. It gives you some structure on how to make alignment so that you can easily decentralize all the decisions down to the teams and be comfortable that they actually understand what we are trying to achieve here. That was definitely part of this journey too, I think, that in the beginning all the IT developers had no clue about the business. So we needed to sort of expand their mind about what is this, and that takes time also.
Yes. And another major part of this is also funding long-living teams. So you invest in people, right? You don't invest in scope or in projects. You invest in people. And once people feel valuable in the way that they can see that, hey, we don't really know what you're going to do for the next year, but we know you're going to do something that is valuable. Then you have that freedom and you have that motivation to be vulnerable and to change, and you're not really worried about the stuff that I'm doing, something that will also be something I'll be able to work on. No, you will be able to work on what matters. And people trust that you can understand what matters. Yeah?
So, as I said, a lot of ideas, in Lean Agile ideas and SAFe gives you shared mental models, a common vocabulary. That's definitely a benefit. But again, remember that SAFe is not an end goal. It's not the goal in itself. It's just a pragmatic starting point, something to start from.
And the last part of it is that the framework should not be viewed as a static framework. It is a framework that will generate the options for you to experiment, right? So if you see something that isn't working, well, it's built in that you can change it, and you will talk about it. You have to inspect and adapt. You have the retrospects. So you will actually be able to constantly change and iterate and become better. And all of this makes it possible for you to actually place the authority where the information is. and that's the teams, right? So thank you very much for listening in to us, and don't forget to rate our session here. And if you have any questions, we will happily ask them. Yeah, go on.
So we have 30 questions and we have -2 minutes. So I'm going to take an easy one. Does this work in an organization that also works in waterfall?
Yeah, good question.
Very good question. Yeah. Actually, yes, and you have to observe that you'll be faced with a massive challenge. We are a small, agile organization within TDC, and there's 300 other guys working in TDC, plus 6,000 in various other departments, and they don't work agile. They work waterfall. They still do. We just finished our budget, the project scope for next year, right? So that process is inbound now. So we have a lot of dependencies. We are an upstream application, so we have some 89 critical systems that we depend on, that we can't develop on. So we need to be, what we do is, we invite stakeholders to our PIs. So we bring stakeholders in, and they will tell us about their deadlines and how much effort they can put into this. And then we sort of figure out, is it plausible that they can do stuff here in time for us to deliver something in this program? And then we plan accordingly. So we have a program board where we list all of our dependencies, and that's a huge, huge program board. But it can work. Of course, what we have also done and learned that we need to do is to make alternative plans. So if there are some departments where it's a little bit shaky, whether we trust them to deliver on time for us to also deliver something, then we will have a backup plan of saying, okay, we will also prioritize something that we know we can start doing if that other thing burns and falls through. So we don't sit and idle and don't do anything. So yes, it can work in a waterfall organization. It will be pretty hard depending on how dependent you are on back-end or your back-end. Yeah?
Thank you. That's all. See you in 25 minutes.
Yes.